May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. And they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. As a young reader, whenever I finished a novel, I always had a moment of sadness, missing the characters that I had come to know in the book and the situations that they were facing. And I had a question that always arose after finishing the last page. What would happen the next day? What would happen the next day? What would these characters do next? How would the future unfold for them? Of course, this means that the story was told very, very well, because writers know that once you're engaged with a story, your curiosity is piqued, and you want to know what's going to come next. Imagine then if you were one of the first hearers of the Gospel according to St. Mark. In one of the best ever concluding lines of a story, Mark's Gospel ends with these words: "So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." Roll the credits. With that sentence, the gospel ends. In Mark's gospel, there is no appearance of the risen Christ, no ascension into heaven, just the women fleeing from the tomb in terror and amazement. If this were made into a movie or a TV series, we'd call this ending a cliffhanger. And what does a cliffhanger do? It makes you ask questions. It makes you go back over the sequence of events that had been unfolding to see whether there were any clues about what might happen next. Your imagination gets engaged. And you turn the story over and over again in your mind to figure out what's next. What's next? So if you put yourself in the place of those brave women who risked their lives going to the tomb on that first Easter morning, and then are surprised when they find the stone rolled away, if you were one of those women, what memories would come flooding back to you about this one who you had known and loved so dearly? Would you remember Jesus' baptism by John in the River Jordan? Would you have recalled perhaps how he proclaimed the dawning of God's kingdom here and now, and how there were signs wherever he went of the inbreaking of that kingdom when he healed the sick and when he fed the multitude in the wilderness? But as you look back, you couldn't help but remember particularly the last 2 days. How after he was anointed, he shared a meal with his friends, and then one of his disciples betrayed him with a kiss, and he was led away by soldiers to a mock trial. You still couldn't get out of your mind the last time you saw him alive, barely alive, nailed to a cross, with crowds taunting him and spitting on him. And you'll never get out of your mind the last words you heard him say, the last words he says in Mark's Gospel: my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then this empty tomb and a young man seated there. He must be an angel. Well, it changes everything. especially when you hear the angel say, "Do not be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there's the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee." He's going ahead. That's the good news. That's the revolutionary moment of Easter. That's where this cliffhanger takes us, not backwards, but forwards. Forward to a drama where the women become to focus the story, forward to a drama that catches each of us up. It catches each of us up as we respond to this unexpected turn of events. The women didn't expect this. They came to the tomb. They came to the tomb looking for death, and they found life. They found new life. They found future possibilities. No wonder they ran away. They'd come looking for death, and they found new life instead. I think they'd probably wanted to go back. And that's understandable if you think about it. If you recall your own experiences of loss and grief, if you've ever lost someone or grieved over something, you know how you want to go back to the way things were before. You want to recreate the time that has passed. You long for things to be just as they were. And as you come to grips with your loss, you go over and over what happened. What happened? How things changed? How much you've lost? Those of us who minister to grieving families know about this. And any one of us who has ever grieved over a lost relationship or a death of someone we love, we know about this in our hearts. You need to tell the story. You'll tell the story of what happened to anyone who'll listen over and over again. It's a need, a compulsion really, to remember, to tell in detail the sequence of events that led to the death or the loss. And this becomes even more urgent when the death or loss was caused by a traumatic incident. And it doesn't take long for the recital of what happened and our grief about that to get turned into a call for revenge. We experienced this last spring in Vancouver after the last game of the Stanley Cup playoffs. After the Canucks lost, then there was a riot. And the response to the riot was a public outcry to get back at those kids who participated in the melee. Get them, charge them, punish them, throw them in jail. The public response was loud and clear. And if that's how we responded to a hockey riot when we lost some of the dignity of our beautiful city, imagine how Jesus' friends would have responded to his execution. There was already enough antipathy toward the Roman regime. You think that they'd want to find a way to retaliate. But the women at the tomb, bless them, listened to the angel rather than to their instinctive response. And they heard the news that he was going ahead of them into Galilee. In the resurrection accounts in the other Gospels, when the risen Christ appears, he speaks only words of peace, and he commissions those who see him to follow in the same path of extending peace and forgiveness. To the women who came to the tomb to revisit the place of death, for whom their only concern was who would be strong enough to roll the stone away, the angel told them to go forward, to go ahead, not to go back, to leave the place of death and their thirst for revenge, and instead to move ahead into the future with confidence because Christ was waiting for them there. No wonder the narrative ends with them fleeing from the tomb in terror and amazement. What they found overturned everything they had expected from life and death, and it pointed them in a new direction. Imagine how hearing this gospel would have engaged those who heard it for the first time. The question this cliffhanger ending would leave you with, of course, is, so what happens next? Where in your future are you going to meet the risen Christ? The cliffhanger at the end of Mark's gospel is always waiting to be filled in by people of every generation. It's waiting today to be filled in now by you and me. Because the resurrection that it witnesses to doesn't leave Jesus neatly in a tomb where we can make of him what we will, where he will be subject to our own projections and ideas. No, instead it leaves us with one who is going ahead of us, who is moving into our future before we are, who is calling us away from nostalgia for the past toward our future with God. Mary Magdalene and the mother of James and Salome, also named Mary, were inspired to move into the next chapter of their lives. What they did, these brave women, our foremothers in the faith, was the most difficult thing that anyone ever has to do in life. And that is this: to move into the future, bringing the lessons of the past with us, and open to whatever is ahead. That's the hardest thing to do. Human history tells over and over again the tragic story of when we fail on either side of that. People either seek to hang on to a past while ignoring the reality of change, or they rush headlong into a future without bringing with them the valuable lessons of the past. And the Christian tradition is not immune from this. And when we get it wrong, as often happens, it's because we ignore the most important part of the Easter proclamation, and that's this: it's not Jesus who raised himself up. It's not the achievement of the women and the first witnesses that affected the resurrection. It's not even the magic of imagination. The resurrection of Jesus is all about the power of God. The Easter proclamation is about God. It's about God's power to do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. It's about God's power alive then, and it's about God's power alive right now, ever bringing new beginnings where we thought that it was all over. It's about God's power working within us, helping us to change and grow and become people of grace and compassion and forgiveness and hope. It's about God's power surprising us with resurrection and inviting us to participate in that power each day of our lives.